Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Chitra Golestani, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the WOMED Institute's webinar entitled The Solutionary Way, Transform Your Life, Your Community, and World for the Better. As many of our viewers know, the WOMED Institute is an online educational institution providing university and extension courses dedicated to the building of a new society through transformative education. Our interdisciplinary courses aim to develop the capacity of participants to contribute meaningfully to the current discourses of society, exploring both the spiritual and material dimensions of our collective advancement. Our educational endeavors, including courses, certificate programs, webinars, and more, aim to inspire a commitment to social transformation, drawing upon Baha'i conceptual framework in the areas of community building, social action, and contributing to prevalent discourses. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Baha'i faith, you can learn more on the international site, Baha'i.org, or the US site, Baha'i.us, BAHAI.us. So I'd like to share that we will be having a few announcements. Looking ahead, we have 2 extension courses starting in November. On November 6th, we have Building a New System of Global Governance. And then on November 20th, we will have Introducing the Kitab al-Aqdas for Deepening Devotion and Discourse. You can find out more on our website. Furthermore, for our next webinar, we will have our acting director, Dr. Derek Smith, doing a webinar on November 17th, about the same time. It is entitled Pathways to Peace, Fundamentals of Social Transformation. Don't forget to mark your calendars for that. Also, please note that applications are open for our Social Transformation Certificate Program. As many of you know, it is a unique tuition-free program that combines, for now, tuition-free, that combines theory and practice for participants to be accompanied on their path to contribute meaningfully to social change. The next 2 online courses are starting in January, and they are Redefining Race, Pathways to Collective Advancement, and also Transforming Education, Knowing, Learning, and Being. It's also an amazing course. The application deadline is December 16th. Now, some of you may ask, how is this program free, right? It is for an extended time, but of course there's no free lunch. So we are seeking students who are interested in committing a full year to this graduate level program to provide meaningful feedback at the end of each of the courses. And so the applicants should either have a bachelor's degree or be in an undergraduate program at a junior or senior level. So for more information and registration, please check out our website and you will find more information there. Now, I think we are getting closer. We're ready to start with our webinar for today. And please note that it is available live streamed on YouTube and accessible later on various podcast platforms. So you can enjoy it later, hopefully share it with others. During the presentation, you're invited to post questions in the Q&A section, some of which will be addressed at the end of the presentation. So we look forward to having an exchange at the end. I should also mention that the views and opinions expressed in the WOMED Institute webinars and academic programs are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States, the WOMED Institute, or any other entities they represent. Now, I have the pleasure to introduce the webinar for today. As we said, it is entitled The Solutionary Way, transform your life, your community, and the world for the better. Oh, how do I introduce a person who I have come to love so dearly? Zoe Weil is the co-founder and president of the Institute for Humane Education, where she developed the first graduate program in humane education, linking human rights, environmental sustainability, and animal protection in partnership with Antioch University. IHE also offers a solutionary micro-credential program and teacher resources to promote solutionary practices in education, some of which I have used frequently. A frequent keynote speaker, Zoe has given 6 TED Talks, including The World Becomes What You Teach. She has authored 8 books, including the #1 Amazon new release in social philosophy, The Solutionary Way. Zoe received the 2023 Spirit of America Award at the Conference of the National Council for Social Studies and has been recognized for her leadership in education and human rights, environmental and animal protection. And in my book, she's also known for the best vegan strawberry rhubarb pie and her utmost kindness for all those who cross her path. So welcome, dear Zoe. We are going to try and make this more conversational than we have done in the past by having PowerPoint presentations. So I just wanted to welcome you and see if there's any initial remarks.
Oh my goodness, Chitra, thank you so much for that introduction. And as you know, the love is very mutual, and you are one of my teachers. So thank you so much. I'm looking forward to today.
Thank you. So we thought we would have a conversation about this wonderful framework that you've developed that is now captured in your latest book. The first opening sentence in the preface of your book is "A better world is possible." Why did you start with that? And how do you think we can build a better world?
So I started with that because there are a lot of people who don't believe that a better world is possible and who think that things are going downhill and going downhill fast. And if one is engaged in trying to build a better world, one sees all the problems that need solving. And I'm one of those people who's engaged in trying to build a better world, so I see those problems. I'm also 63 years old, and I have witnessed how much has changed for the better in my lifetime. When I was born, half of all people on Earth lived in extreme poverty. That percentage is now below 10%, still way too high, but it's better. When I was born, the Civil Rights Act hadn't yet been passed. It was passed when I was 3 years old. And things are better while still being problematic and with a lot of issues that need to be solved. Issues of pollution. When I was born, I grew up in New York City, and smog and soot coated my city and many other cities. And then the Clean Air Act was passed in the 1970s, and the air became cleaner. Waterways in the United States were catching on fire, lakes and rivers, and now waterways are cleaner because of the Clean Water Act. Women and girls didn't aspire to have the kinds of careers they aspire to today and wouldn't get the kind of education they get today. There is a lot that has changed for the better. And so it's important to remind ourselves that things can be bad and better at the same time. And if they can be better, they can be better still. So that's why I started the book off with that. And I also started the book off with that because I have seen the impacts of not having that belief. So about 12 years ago, I was invited to speak at a middle school in Connecticut. So this is before the pandemic. This is before wildfires were destroying communities around the globe. This was before a lot of the polarization that we're seeing had become so extreme. So just to contextualize this, I
Mhm.
asked the fifth and sixth graders what they thought were the biggest problems in the world, and I wrote down their answers on a whiteboard until their answers filled a huge whiteboard. And then I asked them to raise their hands if they could imagine us solving those problems. And of the 45 children in that room, only 5 raised their hands.
Mhm. I've had similar experience. I hear you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I knew I had to do something to restore their hope. So I asked them to close their eyes and I led them in a guided visualization. And I asked them to imagine that they were very old and approaching the end of a long and well-lived life. And I asked them to picture themselves sitting on a park bench on a beautiful day, and the air was clean, and the waterways were clean, and the birds were singing, and species were recovering from the brink of extinction, and nobody went to bed hungry, and there hadn't been a war in as long as they could remember, and we had learned to treat each other and other species with respect and compassion. And then I asked them to imagine a child coming up and joining them. And the child had been studying history in school and learning about darker times and wanting to know, how did things change for the better? And so the child asked lots of questions, and I invited these children with their eyes closed to answer those child's questions. And then the child asks a final question: what role did you play in helping to bring about this better world? What did you do? So while they still had their eyes closed, I asked them to raise their hands if now they could imagine us solving the problems they listed on the whiteboard. And this time, 40 hands went up in the air. All it took to restore their hope was a vision of a better world and a belief that they played a role in helping to bring it about. And so the reason I started the book with "A Better World is Possible" is we need to believe that. And then we need to go on the journey of creating that better world.
Mhm. And if we don't believe it, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. That
Yes.
absolutely, it's dead on arrival.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
what's going to motivate somebody to try and build a better world if they don't believe that a better world's possible?
And that's unfortunately where a lot of people are at.
Yeah.
So even, at the graduate level, even international students with our Paulo Freire program at UCLA, I ask that question each year too when they come,
Yep.
about 30 to 50 students. And most don't raise their hands because they don't believe, they've lost hope.
Yep.
Yeah. So you talk about being a solutionary. Tell us, what is a solutionary?
So I'm going to give you the definition that I use in my book. So a solutionary is somebody who can identify unjust, unsustainable, and inhumane systems and then transform them in ways that do the most good and the least harm for everyone. And by everyone, I mean people, I mean animals, and I mean the environment, all of us. So you might be thinking, well, why do we need a made-up word, solutionary, for somebody who sounds like a problem solver? But a solutionary is not synonymous with problem solver, and here's why.
Mhm.
Somebody can solve the problem of damming a river or blowing up a mountaintop for coal removal, but they're not solutionaries. And the reason is because there's this ethical component in being a solutionary of doing the most good and the least harm. And that ethical component is why we need this new word. A solutionary is also not the same as a humanitarian. So we need humanitarians. Humanitarians alleviate suffering and harm when it happens. But humanitarians are not in the business of addressing the root and systemic causes of the problems. So solutionaries are identifying those systems that are unjust and inhumane, and they are creating and transforming those systems. So that's why we need this word.
Mhm, mhm. And that's why it appears so often in your work, because it captures what we're trying to do. Now, I know that in the Baha'i community, we look at social change with three protagonists: the individual, the institutions and the community, right? So there's like a individual level and then more of a collective level. I think today's conversation is mostly about the individual's ability to look at root causes. And also, the thing that we've learned globally in the Baha'i community is that as we have individual transformation, that affects our collective transformation and vice versa. So, so yeah, I think that there's a lot for us to share. Um, you talk about MOGO principle. I often use that from time to time. So how can someone individually embark on being a solutionary using some of the principles that you share?
Thank you for asking that. So MOGO is short for most good, which is short for doing the most good and the least harm to people, animals, and the environment. So I just call it the MOGO principle because it's nice and short, because it's a fairly long concept.
Mhm.
So what is this principle? Why is it so important? I think of the MOGO principle as really like the golden rule put into practice in a globalized world. How do each of us, how do we do the most good and the least harm through all of our choices, through what we eat, through what we wear, through our volunteerism, through our communities, through our work? And there's so many ways that we are engaging with the world all the time and engaging in a globalized world. And so this principle allows us to examine the impacts of our choices, the impacts of our actions. So there's this short film a couple of years ago. I always, every year I go to the Manhattan Short Film Festival when it's traveling, and it plays at our local theater. And there are these short films. And a couple of years ago when I went, there was one film and it was called The Treatment. And in this film, this couple, they go to a center, it's an office building, and they go to meet to learn about the treatment. And the treatment is a treatment for baldness. So the couple goes in, the man is bald. And so the person who's selling the treatment explains that he's going to take this treatment, $6,000. So it's quite expensive. And he's going to grow a full head of hair permanently. And there's just one side effect. And the side effect is that within the course of a short period of time, one of his cousins will die. So of course the couple is, uh, put off to say the least, and they're very upset, and clearly their resolve to participate in the treatment is waning. But then the person selling it to them, he gives them his head to touch because he has now a full head of hair because he's done the treatment. And you can see their resolve wavering, and they're actually considering the treatment. But they have to leave and think about it. And so they leave. And when they're in the atrium, as they're about to exit, another couple come in, and it's a cousin. And it's a bald cousin who's coming to have their interview about the treatment. So then the film ends. Now, I watched this film and I immediately thought, this is the MOGO principle right here, that we don't realize the impacts of our choices. Now, obviously, nobody would think it's okay that you're going to have a cousin die because you want to have a full head of hair. But many people die, many animals die, many ecosystems die because of our everyday choices. Are we even aware of them? The foods we eat, again, the clothes we wear, the products we buy, they are inextricably connected to systems that are harmful and destructive. And so the MOGO principle invites us to do a little research, do a little investigation so that we can align our choices with our values, which, long ago, that was a lot easier to do than it is today. When you have no idea how anything gets to you and the impacts of everything, well, then how can you really align your choices and your values? You have to do a little research.
Mhm. So true. And I think that it was in the Mogo principles that there were like three ways of looking at three eyes or something.
Yes.
Do you want to say anything about that?
Sure. So the three I's, and there are going to be some more I's coming later, but the three I's for MOGO are inquiry, introspection, and integrity. So we have to inquire about the impacts of our everyday choices. And then we have to introspect to see if what we've learned really aligns with our values. And then when we do that, we have the capacity to live with integrity. So the thing about integrity, everybody wants to have integrity. Well, maybe not everybody, but most people, and I'm sure everybody who's on this webinar wants to have integrity. It simply means that you live according to your values, you walk your talk. But how do you do that when you haven't inquired and then introspected on what you've learned? So I'll give you a
Mm,
quote of
mhm,
Mahatma Gandhi that is really powerful for me. So he was once asked by a reporter, "What is your message?" And we all know that Mahatma Gandhi had a big message, trying to free his country from British rule using only nonviolent methods. But on
mhm,
that particular day, he'd taken a vow of silence, so he didn't launch into his message. He just jotted down on a piece of paper these words: "My life is my message." That's all he wrote. My life is my message. And when I read that, it became clear to me in an instant that if Gandhi's life was his message, it meant that my life was my message, that all of our lives are our message, whether we like it or not. So the question is, are you living your message the way you want to be? And that is integrity. And you can't get there without introspection, and you can't get to introspection without inquiry.
mhm, mhm. That is so true. I often think about the roller coaster that we seem to be on as a society, working, working, working to make money, to buy things. And that becomes our message. And even like working to buy a certain brand and then using one's body to walk around the earth, like being a, a advertisement for a company we don't know has integrity or not. So people are paying to wear a certain brand or carry a certain purse or drive a certain car, and they are using their very being to promote this.
I know. I mean, shouldn't Nike pay us if we're going to wear a shirt with a swoosh on it?
That's always the joke in my family, is the kids saying, "Mom, how much would you have to would they have to give you?" I mean, honestly say, if I were to carry a purse that was so hard to get, they would have to pay me. Why would I pay them? Like, it's just completely irrational if we are looking with the eye of what you just said about Gandhi.
Mm.
And when we look at Gandhi and what he did, I mean, he really started with that introspection, with that self reflexivity, right? One of the things that I practice is a hidden word from Baha'u'llah: bring thyself to account each day, and every ear thou art summoned to reckoning, because we have our own reckoning. We have to bring ourselves to account. It's not about a big judge sending us to heaven or hell. We are the ones that need to truly have this practice of asking ourselves. Now, people have been very critical about, you can't, try to make every decision based on what are you going to do? Research all your life about everything you use? No, of course not. But there are major things that we should be thinking about so that, as the writings say, we don't start with words and end with words, but we end with action.
Mm, yep.
So, how do we have values, beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors that can help us approach this kind of solutionary thinking?
So would this be a good time to do true price, or should we wait for that?
Well, sure. Yeah, let's do it. So that it is, yeah, I think it would be perfect. Let's do it. This is where your critical thinking comes in, right? Systems thinking, all of those wonderful things you talk about. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so true price is a very simple activity that is very stretchy. So I'll explain what it is. We'll do it a little bit, but I want you thinking that, oh my goodness, this could be something I do with my family. This could be something I do with a group of friends in my living room. This could be something that's a project. This could be, I mean, it could be somebody's dissertation, honestly, in graduate school. So in True Price, we look at an everyday object. Could be anything, could be an article of clothing, it could be our cell phone, it could be bottled water, it could be a fast food burger. And we ask a series of questions about that item. So we ask, what are the effects of that item on us as individuals, on other people, on animals, and on the environment? And when I say effects, I mean both positive and negative effects. Then we ask, what are the systems that make this item so easy to get, so commonplace? And what would be an alternative that would do more good and less harm? So back to that MOGO principle. And if we can't find an alternative, what systems would need to change to make alternatives possible? And if we can find an alternative, what systems would need to change to make the alternatives the norm and not the everyday item? So of these different items that I showed you, Chitra, which one would you like to use?
Wow, okay, that's hard. All of them would be good. Let's go with the burger.
Okay, okay, the cheeseburger. And just so you know, just so everybody knows, I have had this particular cheeseburger for, oh, going on 30 years now.
Wait,
And
it's not plastic?
yes, that's why I've had it for 30
Okay.
years.
I thought
Um,
you meant like you had it from a,
Oh,
never
from a
mind.
McDonald's 30 years ago. Well, the irony is that some people have kept cheeseburgers for many, many years and they actually look just like this years later, apparently. But no, this one is not real. It just looks,
One of those stories. Okay.
yes. Okay. So let's ask these questions. So what are the effects? Let's start with positive effects on us as individual consumers. So on me as an individual of that fast food burger.
Convenience.
Convenience, great. Anything else?
Mm, protein that's faster to obtain, not to digest, but people keep saying, oh, meat has more protein than having to prepare other things.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, of course, because it's a fast food burger, I don't have to prepare it at all, right? So I can
Oh,
just
yeah,
go
that's true.
and get it, and there's a fair amount of protein, probably equal amount of fat, maybe a little more fat. But yes, so protein and convenient, and what else?
Inexpensive compared to,
Inexpensive,
but not
inexpensive.
anymore. Like
I
fast food burgers are starting to okay, anyways.
I know. They have gone up. Okay, so what about some negative impacts on me as an individual consumer?
Your health,
Yeah, I mean, eaten in quantities, these are not healthy, right? Like in a large quantity, this can lead to uh, heart issues, um, diabetes, weight gain, obesity, all sorts of problems if
right?
we eat a lot of this. So yeah, the health issues.
Mhm.
What are some positive effects on people in general?
You have a lot of jobs in fast food.
Yeah, lots of jobs. They may not be well-paying jobs, but there are lots of jobs
Mhm.
in all aspects of fast food, including, you know, all the many, many jobs, right? Because
Mhm,
it's not just working in a fast food restaurant, it's all the jobs that lead to this being in a fast food restaurant. What about
mhm.
some negative impacts on other people?
Um, yeah, like everything. Sorry, I don't know how to prioritize. But collectively, I mean, leading to deforestation, having the topsoil run off, having human rights abuses with indigenous people who lived on the land no longer able to live there, and having deforestation with the topsoil running off, affecting the waterways, and then the ecosystems within the rivers. It just, yeah, no, you explain. You
No,
could do
no,
a much better job.
that's exactly right. Like all of those things you said, and interestingly, you segued into the environmental impacts, the negative environmental impacts, but of course those affect people, right? They affect the ecosystems, they affect other species, and they affect us. You know, when we despoil our waterways, when we use up our topsoil, when we cut down our rainforests, and then there's all of the pollution impacts that contribute to climate change, which
Mhm, big
affects
time.
all our ecosystems, but it affects us. So
Mhm.
we're inseparable from the environment. And so these negative effects are huge. Are there any positive effects of this kind of food on the environment that you can think of?
No.
I know I've never been able to think of one either. Um, okay, let's move on to animals. So what are
Okay,
some of the positive impacts on animals of a fast food burger?
none.
So that's what I would have said too, but years ago, somebody in an audience said, well, it's good for chickens. And I was like, that's true. That is spot on. Fast food burgers are good for chickens because when you eat a burger, a beef burger, you're eating a small portion of a big animal. Whereas when you eat chicken nuggets, you're eating a large portion of a small animal. And so many, many, many chickens are are treated terribly and die horrible deaths than cows. And so it was really interesting. So yeah, I mean, if one was going to eat meat and cared about the impact on animals and they were going to choose between chicken nuggets and a burger, the burger would cause less animal suffering, interestingly.
But more environmental harm, no?
Exactly, but more
Okay,
environmental harm.
okay,
So we're going to get to that next question in a minute about what are the
okay.
alternatives. But what are the negative impacts on animals of a fast food burger?
Oh my gosh, so you're the one who can speak to this.
Yeah,
It's
there
horrific, really horrific.
it really is. And it's completely out of sight. So most fast food burgers are the ground up flesh of dairy cows. And so dairy cows in our industrial farming system, I'm not talking about somebody's cow that they may have on their small farm. I'm talking about where the vast majority of our dairy and our cheese and our burgers come from. Cows are forced to have a baby, usually once a year, and their calf is taken away from them on the first day of life. And cows will sometimes bellow out for days when their young are taken from them. And because they're mothers, just like human mothers would be horrified if their baby was taken away from them, cows too. And then we take the milk that's meant for that calf for ourselves, and
Mm.
we are forcing cows to produce sometimes 5 to 10 times the amount of milk that they would normally produce for their offspring, which often results in mastitis, which is a painful udder infection. So then we have to give them antibiotics because they have this infection. And so half of all dairy cows in the United States wind up with mastitis eventually. And so this happens year after year until eventually the cow is no longer producing milk, and then she's sent to slaughter. And so that's why she winds up as pet food or as a fast food burger or some sort of processed meat. And meanwhile, what about her offspring? So her female calves are going to be raised to be dairy cows. Her male calves are never going to produce milk, but they're not the same breeds who are used for beef cattle. So they're often killed right away for veal, or sometimes raised in confinement veal systems to have specialty veal, and they're deprived of iron in their diet, and they're chained in tiny stalls for the duration of their life. I mean, many people will say, I won't eat veal because it's so cruel. But in fact, this is the same thing because it's part of that same system. So moving on from that, what are the systems that perpetuate this fast food burger?
So we just did the critical thinking. Now
Yep.
we're doing the systems thinking.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. You're asking me?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's the fast food industry,
Mm-hmm.
um, seated in the global economics of profit making, which is more important than people's health. It's more important than the environment. It's more important than animal welfare. So the three systems that are highlighted with IHE are the human, environment, and animal systems. So all these three systems together, under our lack of consciousness socially, economically, politically, allow for that kind of cruelty to happen and that kind of imbalance for the environment to happen, and for there to be generational health issues, which then feed our health system, which
Yeah.
makes more profit from lots and lots of sick people.
Yeah.
So those are the systems that I see. I don't know if you want to add to that.
For sure. Thank you, Chitra. And yes, so then there's our political system, so that we have these industries that influence legislation through essentially lobbying and campaign financing, so
Mhm.
that we like have these food systems that are incredibly destructive. They're subsidized. So sometimes when I ask that question, and the reason I'm asking you this question is because
You
this
want to see if I know my stuff still?
no, no, it's because this is the activity, right? Is asking these
Yeah,
questions.
yeah.
Now, you know a lot about this. If I were doing this in a classroom, students would have to be investigating this. They would have to be uncovering this. That is the beauty of it. If you're doing it in your living room with your friends or with your kids in your family, you're going to do research around to find these things out. But one time I was doing this and somebody said, well, capitalism, that's the system, an economic system that perpetuates this kind of food. And I said, well, that's interesting because that's sort of true. But because we subsidize this food with our tax dollars and with our healthcare dollars and with our environmental cleanup dollars, this food is really socialized food, right? That
Mhm.
this could cost $30 instead of $6 or whatever it costs now. I don't know what fast food costs now. It used to cost $1. When I was, when I actually ate this kind of food, it was under $1. But we subsidize so many aspects of these foods. So it's our tax system, our political system, our legal system, our healthcare system, all of these systems, transportation, energy. And so if we're going to ask ourselves what systems would need to change to make alternatives more common, well, first let's ask, what are the alternatives? What alternatives would do more good and less harm than this fast food cheeseburger?
Mhm.
So that's a, fairly
Yeah.
easy one. Maybe it could be a bean burger. Maybe it could be an Impossible Whopper. And if you were going to go to McDonald's anyway, maybe it could be beans and rice. It could be some tofu. There are lots of alternatives. But what systems would need to change to make alternatives commonplace, well, maybe we need to stop subsidizing this and let the free market system, like what would happen if the free market system came into play? Maybe if we stopped feeding this kind of food, dumping this kind of food into our school systems, into our cafeterias where there are children who are now becoming sort of addicted to this kind of food and setting them up for years of ill health.
Yeah, because there's chemicals in it. It's not just like the ingredients of when we were kids in fast food, it's not the same. There's so many more chemicals now in the food. So
And in lots of foods too, including in alternatives, right? So when I said that you could get the Impossible Whopper
yeah, you're
with
right.
um,
That's true.
so yes, there are many, many alternatives that would do more good and less harm. And so then we need to ask, how do we change the systems to make those alternatives commonplace? And that is the gateway to
Mhm,
becoming a solutionary. So this activity that we've just done is basically giving people an insight into a personal choice that can send them on the journey to then establishing a solutionary practice, solutionary
mhm,
thinking, so
mhm,
that they can transform systems and
mhm,
model their message better. So you can start with modeling your message better, and then
mhm.
you can move on to
Well, you
changing
know,
systems.
we did the easier one, I think, of the burger, but what does one do about this? So I
I
have
know.
some ideas, but I'm curious to see when you do true price with the cell phone. Have you done that yet with
I don't do it as an introduction, right?
uh-huh.
Because partly because of what you said, but you could have chosen it, right? You could have said, Zoe, do true price with the cell phone. And it's tough because there is not a good alternative to the cell phone. Just like, until we change some of the fundamental systems in which we are embedded, it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, to extricate ourselves from unsustainable and unjust systems. So this is why a solutionary is going to they're going to start with themselves. They're going to start with like, how can I make MOGO choices in my own life? But then how can I transform the systems? That is what a solutionary does. And right now, I don't know of people working on transforming the systems to make cell
Mm.
phones not have not chemicals, but ores in them that are mined in unsustainable ways and that have such environmental impacts. And so
And
we need to
human
change our
rights
energy.
issues, right?
Say again?
And even human rights issues.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like when these then become disposed of or our computers become disposed of, who is taking them apart? What are they being exposed to in that process? Yeah, there are lots and lots of issues that we
Mhm,
have yet to address, but we can, right? Like
mhm,
solutionaries could address that.
mm,
And maybe it's time to sort of talk about that solutionary process.
mhm, mhm. So you talk about critical thinking, systems thinking, and then you talk about strategic and creative thinking. So I guess like those next levels would be more. I mean, it seems to me that it would just demand the shift between the individual and collective transformation because to be strategic and creative, you can do it within your own circle, but it necessitates that there are institutions and communities, the other protagonists of change
Yes.
involved, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I'm going to address that in one second. I want to circle back to sort of what you were asking in terms of the cell phone. So to embark on a solutionary practice, it helps to ask oneself three questions. What are the problems that I most want to solve personally? What am I good at? And what do I love to do? So somebody in learning about the impacts of electronics on the environment, on other people, on other species might be thinking, I want to address electronics, right? That could
Mhm.
be their entryway, particularly if, they were a scientist or an innovator or engineer or something where they had that skill set and they knew they were good at that and they loved doing that. So those three questions, if we can find the place where the answers meet, well, then we're on our way to being a solutionary. So to circle back to the thinking capacities,
Mhm.
so solutionary thinking is comprised of many kinds of thinking, but primarily critical thinking, systems thinking, strategic thinking, and creative thinking. And as you do True Price, you're honing your critical thinking because you're doing that research and investigation and you're learning about the system. So you're honing your systems thinking. And then you get to the point where you're like, okay, now I need a strategy for solving this problem and I need to think creatively to do it. And that sort of jump starts us in the process of being a solutionary. And I call it in my book, I call it a solutionary process. And so I can jump
Mhm.
into
Yeah, yeah, please
exploring that.
do, please do, yeah.
Okay, so the solutionary process is the way we have defined it has 4 phases in it. The first is identifying the problem that you want to solve.
Mhm.
And that sounds pretty simple, right? Except that some people are thinking that I want to solve the problem of um, climate change or poverty or animal cruelty or polarization in my country. Those are big problems. And
Mhm.
when you're an individual and you're stepping into your solutionary practice, those are too big. You need to be able to narrow down your problem into a problem that you have a sphere of influence with other collaborators for sure, but where you actually feasibly can solve some problem. Starting small is really useful because you can always get bigger. You can learn from the process and then
That's
take
right.
on a
You
bigger
do it
aspect.
intellectually in academe. What is the question? What is your thesis question for your MA, your PhD, or in a certificate program, what question are you really after?
Right.
So, yeah. So
Yeah.
then you're saying in our lives as advocates or activists or community builders, it's the same process.
Yes.
Mhm.
And so that's phase one. And remember earlier when I was talking about the 3 I's of inquiry, introspection, and integrity. And I said there are more I's coming. So we use I's for this 4-phase process too. So the second phase is investigate, another I word, investigate thoroughly. So that's like bringing your inquiry again. So you're going to investigate what are the root and systemic causes of this problem that I'm trying to address. Who are the stakeholders? Who are the experts? What's been done so far to solve this problem? What's succeeded? What's failed? You're asking all those questions so that when you move into phase 3, which is innovate, you can innovate a solution. Or maybe you found some great solution somebody else is doing, and you can bring it into your context, into your community, and you can then move into the 4th I, which is implement. You're implementing your solution. You're going to evaluate it so that you can iterate and improve upon it. More I's. So I think it might be useful to like dive a little bit deeper into the phase 2 and leading into phase 3, that investigative and innovative phase of the solutionary process so that you can understand like how do you actually do this, because it can sound
Mhm.
very theoretical. So maybe if we could put up my first slide, that would be great. Excellent. Thank you. So this is an iceberg, which I just realized is another I word. So in an iceberg, if you see an iceberg in the ocean, you see only the tip of it. But the bigger part of the iceberg lies under the surface. It is out of sight. And that is true of problems, which is why the iceberg model is a really good model for systems thinking and change making. So if we're going to use this iceberg model, we would draw an iceberg and we put our problem statement right at the top. That is the problem that we can see. Right under the surface, what we can't see unless we look for it are the systems, the societal systems that perpetuate that problem, that make that problem happen. But the systems didn't just arise out of the blue. We created those systems. And we created those systems because there are root causes, deeper causes that are our mindsets, our beliefs, our value systems, our psychological and biological systems that all lead us to create the societal systems that create the problem. So if we could show the next slide, we're going to look at a problem that we've all seen. There's litter in my neighborhood. Now, what do most people do to solve this problem? That's
Go and arrange, I don't know, we have, monthly going to the beach picking stuff up, but
yeah.
buy this stuff from our city. Culver City does that, yeah.
Okay, so the way that we often go about solving problems that we see is to try and solve them at this surface level, right? Like, so if we just pick up the litter is going to be gone. But is it really gone, or does it come back next week, next month, next year? Is it a perpetual cycle? If we really want to solve this problem, so I sort of liken picking up litter to a humanitarian response, right? We need it, it helps, it's good work. Bravo to everybody who does it. It doesn't solve the problem. The problem is still brewing. In order to address that problem, we have to look under the surface. So if we look at this, what are the systems that are perpetuating litter? Well, we have our production systems producing a lot of waste, a lot of things that just are disposable. So we're not going to completely use the product. We're going to have parts of it that we don't want. And our economic system that makes so much stuff available to us, and our education and parenting system so that we're not learning that we're responsible for the commons, that we shouldn't litter, that it is our responsibility to keep the commons good for everybody. And our legal and policing systems, there are really no ramifications for littering. And our media and design systems, like if we had enough receptacles for trash, maybe we wouldn't have as much litter. So those are the social systems. What is causing those systems? Well, then those are the deeper causes. Our laziness, our aversion to inconvenience, that out of sight, out of mind mindset, even just selfishness and myopia and lack of respect for the common. So all of those things go into this system. So let's just look at one more slide where we address an even bigger problem. So at the Institute for Humane Education, the problem that we are one of the problems that we are trying to address is that the United States public schools are not educating students to be solutionaries. And we think that all students should be learning to do what I'm talking to you about today. So then we have to look at like all of the systems that come into play that create this problem, and there are myriad systems, and then there are subsystems within those bigger systems. So you can see that there are subsystems written here, and then there are the deeper causes again that lead us to create these systems and subsystems. So, just as one system, the very purpose of school in the United States is to prepare students for global competitiveness. The purpose of school at the US Department of Education is not to prepare them to be solutionaries. So that just, if you just look at what our goal is, well, it's no wonder that we do schools in the way that we are doing them. So you can see a pencil there and you can see all these lines. In this process of becoming a solutionary, once we have done this research, once we have identified these causes, both the systemic causes and the deeper root causes, then we can see how they are connected. And we do that by drawing lines between them. This is just basically a model for people to use when they are going through this process. And once you have done that, you can start to see where there might be leverage points, where if we created a shift in one of these leverage points, we could have far-reaching positive impacts. Okay, we
Mm,
can close the slides now. So that's the iceberg model, and it's in my book for those who are interested in learning more.
mhm, mhm. You know, if we look at the iceberg model for trash and we go to the farthest root of the problem of like not caring, being lazy, not having integrity. But to have another level of going deep for from a Baha'i perspective would be to look at why somebody would not have integrity. And to me, I think it's lack of knowing the purpose of life.
Mm.
So from the writings, like for us, it's to know and to love God and serve humankind and serve the world, work towards the betterment of the world. Like that is my purpose here on this plane of existence, right here, right now. And if people don't have that kind of um, vision for their life, then why? Like it practically would make sense to conserve my energy and just throw it on, not walk over if I'm at the beach, and to throw my trash in the trash can, than to just let it be on the sand. So there has to be that deeper thing. Um, there is one slide on the twofold moral purpose. Maybe I'll share that real quick. Um, so the twofold moral purpose, as I alluded to earlier, is about how our inner life and outer life are um, linked. And there's a letter on behalf of Shovi Effendi, the great grandson of Baha'u'llah, who's the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith. He says, we cannot segregate the human heart from the environment outside us and say that once one of these is reformed, everything will be improved. Man, meaning human, at that time, that was what was written, but is organic with the world. His inner life molds the environment and is itself deeply affected by it. The one acts upon the other, and ever abiding change in the life of man is the result of these mutual reactions. So, truly, if we want to see people, whether we call it being solutionaries or committed to working towards the betterment of the world, that inner work has to be done. So
I
thank you for sharing that. We could go back to regular format.
So that was beautiful. And I will say that for those who don't have faith, there can still be this desire to do the most good and least harm that stems from empathy and compassion and the joy that comes in service,
Mhm.
whether one has faith or not. And I've seen that over and over. People coming alive with the joy of working with community to achieve common positive goals and the joy that comes with having meaning and purpose because one sees good unfold in one's path.
Yes, because when we are getting energy from tapping into our higher nature, that is when we are encouraged to do more. But when we are surrounded by in our environment, let's say materialistic forces, let's say forces of racism, of sexism, then our spirits are brought down and we can't envision, like we started, right? That a better world is possible because all we see around us is decisions being made by the lower nature of people. And it just becomes either a downward spiral or an upward spiral. So, yeah. So there's so many things that we can go further into, but I think that we're at the top of the hour. So I'll take us to the final question here about. I know that IHE has a master and doctorate degrees through the university that you work with, Antioch. Um, what are some of the examples of solutionary thinking and efforts that have been initiated that has been encouraging to you?
So our graduate programs are focused on education, on humane education. And so the people who come into our graduate programs are going to be educators in some capacity. So some are going to be classroom teachers, but they're all going to bring education into the world. So the solutionaries who go through our graduate programs and become solutionaries may not be inventing new, more sustainable cell phones or
Mhm.
different political systems that might be more likely to produce a healthier democracy, but they're going to be working in education. So some are like we believe that education, the schooling system, is the root system underlying all other societal systems. That's why I've focused my whole life on transforming this system. So some people are creating new curricula and bringing new lessons to their students that are solutionary focused lessons. And we're training a lot of teachers in that way. But we have graduates of our program. One created the Rise Travel Institute and bringing basically a solutionary lens to traveling sustainably and being of service when you travel so that you're not potentially just causing more harm as a tourist, but you are actually supporting communities, supporting ecosystems, supporting other species, and doing so in a sustainable way. And we've had some students write books. Like one of our graduates, she wrote a book called Vegan Minded, which was a really beautiful solutionary book that invites people to think about their diets and how their diets can cause more good and less harm. And she does this in this gentle, inviting way that doesn't judge anybody, but invites people to learn more. So there's so
Mhm.
many, but those are just a
Yeah.
couple.
Yeah, yeah, no, thank you so much, though. I really, really appreciate all of these wonderful concepts that you have shared with us. I'm gonna take this time to look at a couple questions that have come in. Um, okay, so there's a true price question here from Philip. What are the consequences of having a pet dog or cat?
So that's that would be a really interesting true price question to ask. I would invite people to think about the difference of purchasing a dog or cat from a breeder or a pet store versus rescuing a dog or cat who already needs a home from a shelter SPCA. So, in the one hand, if we buy dogs and cats, there are other dogs and cats who are going to be killed in shelters for lack of homes because we have more of these animals in our society than we have homes for them. So that's a first
Mhm.
question to ask. And then, of course, when we have these animals, if we have a cat and we let that cat outdoors, that cat is going to be a predator preying on songbirds and small mammals and could be disrupting the ecosystem. So keeping that cat indoors is a way of doing more good and less harm. Also, the cat will live longer. So there's all these little questions we can ask ourselves. What are we feeding our animals? And what are the impacts of their diets? So I think it's a great question to do the true price analysis of.
Yeah, it really is. I think there's so many, questions about every decision that we make that, like you said, has an impact not only on our homes or our families, but much, much farther beyond that. Please, if you have other questions, send them in. I see that there are several true price questions here. We can't do them all, friends, but I wanted to move the conversation along a little bit more and ask the question of how do we think when we're conversing with people who may have very different viewpoints than we do? What are some ways in which we can engage? And it doesn't always have to be political, but let's just say um, somebody who really believes that our economic system should just, should be, there's nothing wrong with just focusing on profit, for example. What are some ways? I know that you have talked about not having debates and having more conversations. Can you say something about how polarized our society is?
Yes. So debate is a very common format that we use in our society. And either or thinking is a very common way of thinking. And so what you asked makes me think about how to answer that debate question, but it also makes me think about how to answer just the human question. How do you bridge, how do you build bridges with people who have different views than you? It's a little different than how do we transform the debate thinking. So I want to answer both of them.
Mhm.
I think that to build bridges, we have to genuinely be interested in hearing from the other person. We have to believe that that other person has a legitimate perspective and has reasons for thinking and feeling what they think and feel, and that we want to know that we are not going into that conversation to change them, to debate with them, to argue with them, to tell them that their position is wrong, that we are really going in to understand. And that's a mindset, right? And it
Mhm.
is a similar mindset that leads us when we are presented with either or perspectives, which we are all the time, right? We are programmed in our society to debate because we're taught it in schools, very common in the United States. I mean, when my son entered high school, one of the requirements for graduating was participating in a debate. So it was a fabricated either or scenario, and you're assigned a side and you're supposed to research it, argue it, and win. And it first occurred to me how really undermining this approach is to creating solutions. In 2009, when I was in my car and I was listening to the radio, and there was an ad for a debate that was going to be conducted at New York University for the Intelligence Squared series. And the debate topic was whether or not the United States was responsible for Mexico's drug wars. And I remember just feeling sort of shocked that this was going to be held at NYU with an audience. There was going to be the one side and another, experts arguing their side. The audience was going to vote on who was the winner. Meanwhile, the drug wars were raging. Meanwhile, people are dying. And I'm thinking to myself, there are all these underlying systems contributing to this: education systems, poverty systems, systems of racism, lack of access to opportunities. And meanwhile, people are dying of drug overdoses. So there's that problem. And I'm just imagining what would happen if, instead of having this sort of arbitrary question that was going to be debated, you brought in experts to talk about how do we solve this problem? How do we solve the problem of overdose deaths? How do we solve the problem of cartels? Like, really, how do we solve this? Like, wouldn't that be a better use of time? But just as my son didn't have to participate in a solutionary team to solve problems, but had to participate in a debate team or a debate, we as a society don't do this, but we could. We could do this. We could bring a solutionary mindset. We could bring a solutionary lens that doesn't accept arbitrary either ors, and that when we confront a challenging, controversial issue, we find places of agreement. And I guarantee you, most of the time, we can find a place of agreement, even with something as contentious as the abortion issue. Pro-life and pro-choice people can all agree that it would be good if as few girls and women faced an unwanted pregnancy as possible. There's a point of agreement. How can we reach that? Right? There are ways to work together across very big divides. If
Mhm.
we can agree on some problems and collaborate with big hearts and open minds and great thinking.
Absolutely. And I think that the world over, when we try to employ Baha'i consultation, it's searching, coming in with searching for truth. If you come to the table with your own agenda, with not being open the way you said, not actually listening, not wanting to genuinely hear the other person, then it just becomes who's bringing what, you know, and then trying to convince each other rather than searching for the truth, rather than really collectively taking that perspective. But I think also, in our certificate program at the Wilmette Institute, we really are trying to get away from that dichotomous thinking because it really, really does stop us from being able to search for the truth. And that, where the conclusion that we are at, I think, just in the Baha'i community in general, is that um, none of the systems right now can be reformed. They are all going to basically decline based on the lack of moral, ethic, spiritual life that is missing from them, and that we have to, instead of trying to put our energy into patching up, a broken system, to building new systems. And that could be done through the ways in which, we were discussing, for it to be dialogical, for us to consult with one another, for us to, the way we come into a space, are our hearts open? Are our minds open? Are we willing, right? But that model that we have with debate, and we see it, of course, right now during in our political system, especially heightened, right? That it only leads to lack of progress,
Yeah.
and being stopped from a way forward that would lead to collective advancement, let's just say.
Yeah.
But with that, I want to thank you wholeheartedly, dear Zoe, for giving us the time and sharing your work with us. If you would like to find more about the Institute for Humane Education, I think there's a little website that you can find out more. And we hope to see you again. Thank you so much, Zoe, for being here, really.
It was a joy, Chitra. Thank you to everybody who was here today. And I hope that you will all go out and, in your own minds and in your own work and in your own hearts, answer that child's question at the end of your life when that child says, "What did you do to help bring about a better world?"
Indeed. Thank you so much, Zoe. Really appreciate your words. Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. Looking forward to seeing you at our next webinar, also on social transformation, November 17th. Have a good day, everybody.